I'm Jim Carney.
I'm Linda Hirsch.
And welcome back to a new season of EdCast, a program produced by educators for everyone interested in education.
For many of our youngest learners, the beginning of the school year marks their first time in a real classroom, a new environment that expects much more from them socially and academically. There are many steps between the first words a child speaks at home and the language of the classroom with its greater literacy demands. How do children make this transition? Today, educator and literacy expert Elliott Koreman joins me to discuss how children acquire language and what parents and schools can do to foster children's reading and writing development.
Later on in the program, I'll pay a visit to a Manhattan public elementary school to see how educators approach early learners on the front lines. But now, let's go to the studio with Linda and her guest.
My guest today is Elliott Koreman, literacy consultant and instructor in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching at the Hunter College School of Education. Welcome to EdCast, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Linda.
This is our season opener, and we picked the topic of literacy because I think it's so important. Can you define for our audience what we mean by literacy?
What we mean by literacy is reading and writing, obviously, and depending on the audience we're talking to, the definition can change a little bit. When I'm working with teachers, doing some staff development, or working with college students, the definition is the construction of meaning from text. That's reading. The construction of meaning with text is writing. But when speaking with parents, it's a little too complicated, perhaps, and we say understanding what the kids read and writing in a way we can understand what they're writing.
Now, when kids move from home to school, our earliest learners, there's a big difference in what they have to know in terms of using language. What happens to kids? And tell me a little bit about how they acquire language in the first place, and then what happens when they have to shift to another discourse.
Actually, the difference is not all that big. However, there are different things about reading and writing than about speaking and listening. Okay. So one of the ways children learn to acquire oral language is by being immersed in a venue where there's a lot of language going on around them, sitting at a table with their parents, caretakers, listening to people speaking to each other, picking up the meaning of things, the semantic part of it, listening to the syntax, not consciously, but they're learning that. And they're also learning about how the word sounds. It's sort of a continuum for children, and they learn bit by bit. So children begin by saying bottle, by saying the, and then ot, and so on and so forth. And they learn then to say one word, and it progresses to more than one word, eventually progressing to sentences, and eventually progressing to a discourse with other people.
Right.
In school, the continuum continues. What we know about early language acquisition orally, we try to apply to the classroom. That's what a good classroom looks like when they begin to work with kids in literacy.
Now, we know that there are obviously different levels of preparation for kids when they enter kindergarten and first grade. I mean, our literature tells us that some kids come in with much better basic skills to get them ready. What can parents do in those earlier years to get their kids really ready for that school environment?
You're absolutely right. The kids do come to school, some better prepared than others. We used to tell parents all the time, just read to your children. That's the best thing to do. Now we understand the importance of oral language as well, that not only should you be reading to children and reading aloud to children and pointing to words and eventually having them read with you, but it's also vitally important to make sure that they are immersed in an oral language situation. That listening to language is very, very important. We need to demonstrate for them. If they attempt to say the word bottle and they say the demonstration should be holding up a bottle and saying bottle. Now, we can't teach everything because this kind of oral language acquisition is natural. It develops naturally. You can't sit with a child and say, today we'll learn to say bottle. But it becomes something that progresses from day to day.
And that's what linguists call the language instinct, or Steven Pinker. I mean, that we have within us, we are wired to learn language. But you're raising an interesting point about the oral language. And is it enough? Well, let me ask you this. There's the talking to your child, and then there's hearing oral language by sitting in front of a computer or in front of a television. Is that the same? Are they equal? Or is there a different quality to the oral language that we expose children to?
I think the quality of an interaction with other people is better. Is the other totally bad? No. I think it's good that kids hear language, whether it's on a video or watching a TV program or whatever. But the best is actually the interaction with their caretakers. They can see the smiles on the faces, the expressions parents make. They can hear the intonation, the connection between what they're saying and what you're saying. So when they're watching TV, there isn't another piece. There's only one piece.
Right.
So when they're sitting with their parents and talking back and forth, there is a second piece, and that's very, very important.
And that would increase a child's vocabulary, the reading and the talking, to get them better prepared.
It increases all of that. And when we talked about, your initial question was children coming to school,
right,
some ready, some not. We talk about kids being literacy set, ready for school. That means kids who have a wonderful vocabulary from what happened in oral language acquisition. They understand syntax, they understand semantics, and they're ready to go. As opposed to kids who come from a more language-deprived home, where they come to school with some of that missing, whether it be semantic, syntactic, or phonological.
Or vocabulary, or
vocabulary, whatever it may be.
Sense of narrative, all those things.
Sense of narrative, and also sense of procedure. You know, we talk with kids about procedure in reading also. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. There's sequencing, and that's modeled at home by many parents, but not by all.
Now, getting back to the home and when children learn language, you know, there's a controversy or talk about, is it good for babies and young children to be exposed to two languages at the same time? Obviously, many of us feel that being bilingual is a really good thing, and yet some people think, well, maybe it's confusing for children, young children, to learn multiple languages at the same time. What are your feelings about that?
I think I agree with you that being bilingual is a wonderful thing. I was talking with my class last night at Hunter about the value of having two languages or more. However, there is a slowing down, in my opinion, of the acquisition of the first language when both languages are used with the child in early years. I think, as we know in syntax, we know that in some languages the descriptor, the adjective, follows the noun, as opposed to other languages like English, where it precedes
like red book,
the noun, like red book, like right. So I'm not 100% sure that it does affect it, but I think that it might slow down the learning in some areas. However, once the kids get to school and become fluent in their language, or even at home before they come to school, once you feel comfortable that your kids are ready to go, I definitely feel the second language is very, very valuable.
Okay. Now, are there any early warning signs that you think parents should be aware of with their children in terms of their acquisition of that first language?
Well, I think that parents often mistake this as being like a benchmark, like by the time my child is 12 months old, he should be speaking. That's not true. There are developmental issues, just as when kids learn to walk. Some kids sit, then start to crawl, then pull themselves up, then begin to walk. Some fall. We call those approximations. Same thing we call them in reading and writing.
Just like in life.
Just like in life, exactly. And so we can't have specific dates, targets. However, we can say that by the time, I would say by 18 months old, the issues sort of are brought to the front. The child is not speaking, not able to pronounce words. It's time, and parents have that instinct, just as teachers hopefully have an instinct about things that go on in school, to consult with an expert in it. To talk, starting certainly with a pediatrician, talking about what the parent is seeing, and then getting some advice from the pediatrician and maybe going further. There may be issues that are preventing the child from speaking.
And better to address them sooner.
Right, and one of my students last night was talking about how he couldn't speak in school until he was older, and it turned out he was hard of hearing. He couldn't hear language, and so he couldn't replicate it.
Now, you know, we are looking towards schools, particularly pre-K and nursery, as a way of providing students who come from home environments that are not as literacy rich, to give them some of that. And so now lately there's been a real push to take play out of the nursery kindergarten curriculum and replace it with a much more conscious attempt to teach reading readiness. What do you think? What should we do in nursery and pre-K?
I think there's a very important place for play. Play is not something that's meaningless. It involves social interaction. It involves talking, one kid talking to another. There is nothing in it that's not valuable. This move from play to learning to reading and writing is not a hard and fast thing. It should be immersing kids in language in the kindergarten, both written and oral language, and exposing them to reading. Some kids come to kindergarten prepared to read. Mm-hmm. Some kids come with a big deficit mm-hmm. in terms of knowing the things they need to know to be ready to read. However, play has its place.
So the role of the school is something that you and I are going to talk about in detail. Jim Carney had the opportunity to visit a public school in Greenwich Village to talk to a principal and see what the school is doing to help children attain literacy. Let's take a look.
The Greenwich Village School in Manhattan is a model of literacy training for students in pre-K through grade 5. Kelly Shannon is the principal and has been with the school for almost 2 decades. I met with her in her office.
So we are a population of over 802 students this year. We serve pre-K through 5th grade students. We have approximately 4 to 6 sections on each grade level, depending on the grade level. This is the first year that we actually have pre-K back in our building. We hadn't had the program for several years because of overcrowding. We serve the Greenwich Village community, which is a large geographic area.
What's the philosophy and approach to literacy that you have here at PS41?
So we do have a mission statement, which is on our website, but to sum it up, I think the way we've always approached education at PS41 has been from the understanding that you look at the whole child, you want to make sure that you're teaching basics really well in all the content areas, but a major emphasis for us is cross-disciplinary studies, that our students will learn reading and writing and mathematics. In addition to the skills that they need to be taught, they'll learn through the approach of an interdisciplinary approach, such as using social studies as the main emphasis for bringing reading, writing, and potentially mathematics into those studies.
How do you approach the whole concept of teaching literacy to young students, particularly in the earlier stages, like in kindergarten and 1st grade?
So one thing we're trying to balance is the fact that as the standards have increased, we want to focus on the academics, but we also want to make sure that there's significant time through play for students to learn and acquire language acquisition, which is important. So we have been a school that's been affiliated with Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. So we are a reading and writing workshop school, which means that all the students in grades K through 5 have reading and writing workshop on a daily basis, which really consists of the teachers understanding that we want to have work where there's opportunities to work with whole groups of students and present overall concepts, and then have opportunities within any workshop for students to see something demonstrated, modeled for them, an ability to practice that, and an ability to provide feedback on what the students were able to accomplish in any given period in reading and writing workshops.
What are some of the challenges that your teachers face in terms of reaching out to different levels of learners, like some students who may come in very articulate, knowing their letters, and others who have not had as much experience?
So in our school, we do have a wide range of the way in which students come in kindergarten and 1st grade. And what we try to do through our program is make sure through activities such as shared reading, read aloud, reading workshop model, that they have an opportunity throughout the day to encounter lessons that will offer challenges at different places for students. So that, for example, if you're in a kindergarten classroom, when they do morning meeting and they're doing work around days of the week and they're doing sounds, letter sound correspondence activities, that it's in mind with the understanding the teacher's been doing assessment right from day one to understand if the students, if a good majority are at one place, the lessons are geared towards a certain level, and then when they go to do small group work, that's where you're differentiating. I think the primary challenge that we're facing today as class sizes have increased is how to provide enough individual support for the range of learners that we experience in any public school education setting. And so often it's a matter of recognizing what structures and routines are in place that will really effectively maximize the learning that can take place. And that means really adjusting as you go along.
I also met with 2 literacy coaches at PS41, Hallie Hockman and Susan Nye.
My role has a lot of different responsibilities. My main priority is providing a support to the teachers for literacy, reading, writing, and in social studies. And it could look very different depending on the teacher, because we have a range of teachers who have been here for a number of years or who are brand new to teaching.
I also coach and work with teachers from pre-K through second grade. And the majority of my role and responsibility is to provide support and meet with them to either collect data, to study what the students are doing, but primarily to collaborate and think of ways in which we can help support the students in various modes or functions.
Is there a different approach to dealing with the different grades as far as literacy and teaching in the classroom between a lower grade level and maybe an intermediate grade level? Susan?
Well, what's really similar is that our units of study really offer a really good continuum in terms of the different units that we do study. So K would study nonfiction study work, and we read and write nonfiction in that content area, as well as fifth graders. So we are working in terms of studying the same units, but we vary in a sense that we look at the approaches of learning and we look at the developmental reading and writing stage, and that would differ.
And I think also when we get into the upper grades, the comprehension component in terms of reading plays a larger role in that in the younger grades they're spending a lot more time on decoding and learning those reading skills, so that when they get to the upper grades, the focus then becomes more, not that the focus becomes more on comprehension, but the thing with our units of study and something that as a school we work very hard on is building that coherence from grade to grade, and how what they do in, let's say, second grade impacts what they're going to do on third grade. So they're carrying those strategies with them throughout their whole time at school.
And now, back to Linda and her guest in the studio.
So, what the schools should do. I have friends of mine, when we were looking at schools for our children, we really didn't know what to look for. And I have to assume that if my friends who were pretty knowledgeable didn't know what to look for, most parents don't. When you're looking at a school for your child, what should you be looking for in terms of how that school's approaching reading and writing?
So in the lower grades, obviously, in the primary grades, kindergarten and grade 1, you need to make sure that there is an attention placed on, or a focus placed on, developmental issues. That the school is aware of the fact that not everybody will learn to read and write at the same time. And they understand the things that need to be done in a classroom to foster that kind of learning. Now, how do you learn that? You speak to the principal or the assistant principal of the school and find out what their philosophy is in the primary grades.
What's the philosophy you adhere to? We've heard all about phonics versus whole language and the supposed reading wars. I mean, I haven't heard that much about the reading wars lately. Maybe that war has reached some kind of an armistice, but what do you want to see in a reading classroom?
Well, in working with teachers as a consultant and in working with students as a professor, I want to see a classroom that attends to all of those things. For some reason, there was this attempt or notion that a whole language approach did not include phonics. It included phonics in other places where it worked beautifully, but it came to this country and it seemed to get lost in the muddle of what goes on in a classroom.
What got lost? The idea that...
The phonics instruction. Phonics instruction is very important. Kids need to know the sounds of letters, the blends, et cetera, et cetera. They need to do it, but not all of them need the same thing. So there has to be a differentiation of the instruction in a classroom as early as kindergarten. Not every child needs the same thing. Skilled teachers know how to assess.
It's difficult.
Find it. It's difficult, but it's necessary.
Okay.
How to listen to children, how to listen to their oral language when they begin reading, how to listen to their reading, and figure out what it is they know and what it is they don't know. And work with them, either in small groups or individually if necessary, to move forward.
Now, you do a lot of professional development work with teachers, I know
Yes.
that. When you are helping them help children read, what do you tell them?
I don't tell them, I show them.
Okay.
I get in front of their class and I talk with the kids and I model for them the things they have to do. I talk with them about the importance of finding out what children know, the assessment piece. You cannot teach children as if they were all one, so you need to do some kind of an assessment, they vary from place to place, to find out where the kids are. Then you need to work with kids in instructional materials that are just right for them. So giving kids a book, as they used to use basal readers in many schools, a book in a grade level that half the kids can read, a quarter can't read, and a quarter it's much too easy for them, is not the way to go. We need to be working with children in books that are just right for them. That makes sense.
So, but can you have various levels in the same classroom? In a practical way for a teacher, how does a teacher put that into practice?
And not only can you, you must. Okay. This is something that has to be done. Teacher puts it into practice by learning how to work with whole class instruction, by modeling something for the kids, for the whole class, and then working with small groups of kids during the time that other kids are working independently on other things. And when the group comes down to only one kid, working with the one kid.
Why has it been so difficult, in your opinion, to budge our New York City reading scores on standardized testing?
Well, I don't know that much about the New York City standardized testing scores. Well, I do know that the instruction...
There's still a big achievement gap.
Yeah, there's definitely a big achievement gap. I think it was bigger before. I'm not one who thinks that everything that's been done is for naught. I do think, and I have seen for myself, that many schools in New York City that have been working with consultants, working with programs, have made incredible strides toward working with kids at their instructional levels, and things have gotten better. There are other issues. There are social issues with kids who come to school sometimes, needing more than schools are able to provide. There are issues of the quality of the teachers in schools, which I know that the city is working on. But there are so many components that it's hard to pin it down to one thing.
Let's just segue for a moment over to writing and teaching of writing. We obviously even see at the university level that we often feel that our students are not really writing at the level that we want them to write. How do you feel that writing instruction should be introduced and taught in the lower grades?
So recalling the definition of writing as constructing meaning with text, we understand that children need to learn how to use words so that they can communicate ideas. That's why at the very beginning, the emphasis is not placed on the spelling, and the emphasis is not placed on the syntax to a great amount, but rather on the semantics, getting the notion across. We call it, in some places they call it invented writing, inventive writing.
Invented
I like temporary.
Okay.
Because it gives people confidence that it goes away. It's not there forever, nor should it be there forever. What we should do with kids in school, in front of the whole class, is model for them. Model good writing. And think aloud.
And that isn't a notion we're coming back to. At one time, modeling was popular, then it fell out of favor, and now there is research looking at modeling again as a really positive way, as an important tool.
Very important tool. I remember when I was in high school, a teacher would write on my paper, make your essay more interesting, without ever telling me what I should do to make it more interesting.
You mean it wasn't interesting?
It wasn't interesting. So now we work with kids modeling use of descriptive language, use of metaphor and simile, a use of commas and periods and grammatical structures and so on and so forth. But we have to show them. We can't tell them.
And good readers tend to be better writers. There tends to be a reciprocal relationship between reading and writing. So.
There is that. However, for the kids who are not good writers, they need to be grouped separately and work on a specific issue with the teacher.
We're running out of time. I want to ask you one more question. Technology, it's everywhere.
Right.
Is it aiding literacy development, hampering literacy development? No impact? What do you think? It's everywhere.
I think when used appropriately, it's a tremendous aid to literacy development.
And how so?
By having kids exposed to things on sites that they can use, by having kids learn the procedures of using technology in classroom. You're talking about in classroom or at home?
Well, both. I mean, it's part of their environment. I mean, we see,
Yeah, it cannot be ignored. Obviously, we're moving into a technology world. We moved into it. We're actually in the 21st century. And kids need to be comfortable using it. So I think any effort not to use it is a mistake. Rather, it's important for them to be supported in their use and given direct instruction. on how it can be used appropriately.
Is there any difference from what you're seeing in these earliest rounds of digital books? Are you seeing any differences in how children access text or respond to text digitally versus on the printed page?
No, I haven't.
So it's pretty much the same?
Pretty much the same, yes.
In the little time we have left, I want you just to describe the Elliott Koreman perfect classroom. Perfect is too strong a word, I know, but if you could design a classroom tomorrow that everyone would follow, that the chancellor would implement tomorrow morning, what would it look like?
So let's talk about kindergarten, just because that is really the entrance point for children coming into schools. Although in many cases children have gone to school for 2 or 3 years before that. I see a teacher standing at the door the first day of school, and I've seen this myself, with buttons to give the kids that say, I am a reader, I am a writer. Can they read? Can they write? Perhaps not. But the teacher's emphasis is on the expectations that he or she has for those kids. Then the whole process in the classroom is not a pressurized kind of situation, but a deliberate, structured approach toward exposing kids to letters, to numbers, to text in books, to text on charts, and not a formalized approach, but a very structured approach. You need someone who knows how to think, how to lay out materials, how to not overwhelm kids, but how to support kids, how to nurture reading, how to make it enjoyable for kids, how to support early writing, and how to make it interesting for kids.
So it's not so easy being a teacher.
No, it is not easy being a teacher, but it is so important that we have good ones.
Thank you so much for joining us today and really helping us understand some of the factors that go into raising children who have literacy skills. Thank you so much. Elliott Koreman, thank you for coming to EdCast.
It's been a pleasure, Linda.
Don't go away. We'll be back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites.
Education Week reports that flipped classrooms is a new teaching approach gaining popularity. It replaces traditional classroom lectures with video tutorials. Students watch the videos for homework with the idea of freeing up classroom time for hands-on activities and application of knowledge. Educators see benefits and drawbacks in this use of on-demand videos. If you've had any experience with flipped classrooms as either teacher or student, we'd like to hear from you. Drop us a line at cunyedcast@gmail.com.
What's the best way to study? It's not the way most college students prefer. Education Week reports on a study which asked students to read science texts and then prepare for a test by either reading the text once, reading it a number of times, drawing a concept map, or trying to remember material by quizzing themselves. Most students studied by rereading the material, a method they believed would help them do well. But research proves otherwise. Quizzing was the most successful way to study. Students using this method answered more questions correctly and were better able to make connections across concepts.
I guess I have to give more quizzes in my classes then.
Well, people are meant to quiz themselves in a way. Yeah.
Well, that does it for this first edition of a new season of EdCast.
And stay with us this year for thoughtful conversation about education.